There's been a lot of hot drama in the Christian YouTube world recently. Leighton Flowers of Soteriology 101 and Warren Mcgrew of Idol Killer, who are both very anti-Calvinism, got a lot of people upset. People like our friend Chris Date. Because Warren and Leighton compared Calvinists to the Baal worshippers of biblical times, who purposely killed their children to make the gods happy. Understandably, people were a little disgruntled.
There is not a scintilla of honesty in what Warren Mcgrew said.
That is an absolute lie, Warren. That's an absolute lie. Why are you saying things like that? It's an appalling comment to make.
It's horrible. Wow.
What did they say that was so radical to make people respond like this? Now, just for context, popular YouTuber provisionist Leighton Flowers was talking about what he sees as how some Calvinists might feel when they're trying to understand how God might have chosen some for heaven and others for hell. It's important to know that they are talking about the belief called infant damnation, which some Calvinists hold, where infants who die before reaching an age of moral accountability or before being able to understand and accept religious doctrines may be condemned to hell or subjected to eternal punishment.
You can't be perfect, that condemns you. Oh yeah, you also can't confess your imperfections. So they're both bad news. And then the good news is some of you are picked unilaterally before you're ever born. And if you happen to be one of those, then that's really good news for you. If it happens to be some of your children aren't picked and some of your friends aren't picked, that's bad news too. But if you're picked, you can at least count on that as being good news.
Then Warren Mcgrew compares such Calvinists to Baal worshippers.
It made mention, Leighton, of like, well, if I'm elect and my children aren't, that's okay. And I just wanted to highlight how that's the same kind of spirit and mindset that the ancient worshipers of pagan deities would engage in when they would sacrifice their children to Baal. Because as long as I get my good crops, I'm willing to throw my child on the pyre. As long as I, am being blessed financially, I'm willing to throw my child on the pyre. It's the same mindset where they're like, well, God may have eternally reprobated my child, but as long as I get into heaven, I'm cool with that.
If it wasn't already clear, the word pyre that Warren is referring to is the structure child sacrificers would put the sacrifice on. What was most upsetting for many was obviously the phrase,
it's the same mindset where they're like, well, God may have eternally reprobated my child, but as long as I get into heaven, I'm cool with that.
My thoughts were, of course, that's odd. Why would anyone in their right mind think anyone at all would be okay with God sending their child to hell? Nonetheless, infant damnation, where they don't even have a chance to accept the gospel. Even the Baal worshippers weren't happy about what they did. Nobody is cool with that. And also, why would Warren imply that they only care about getting into heaven? Like, sure, some people are worried about not making it to heaven, but that doesn't all of a sudden mean said people just stop caring about their children. There was a little ambiguity about who he was talking about. He never said Calvinists who believe in infant damnation, but literally anyone who's ever spent more than 3 seconds on the topic of infant damnation knows that most Calvinists don't hold to this view. So that was immediately clear to me that he was referring to only Calvinists who specifically hold this view. I mean, he would have to be clinically insane to think such a ridiculous thing like all Calvinists taking this position, given how much he talks with Calvinists literally every day. My typical mentality of things like this is if someone says something which seems absolutely nonsensical, something that only clinically insane people would believe, unless it's on TikTok, my first thought is always, it's possible my first interpretation is right, but maybe I've misunderstood him. And naturally, because I have much better things to do than watch a 4-hour live stream to fully understand the context, I chalked it up to possibly a weird thing to say, but I don't care that much to find out if he meant something different. So here I am trying to live my best life, and I keep seeing all kinds of comments of people blocking each other, hurt feelings, parody videos.
There once was a live stream with 3 men, Leighton, Jordan, and Warren.
Anti-Calvinists are attacking people, claims of people attacking other people, not the views. And even though I said it wasn't worth the time, here I am doing something not worth the time, trying to help people. So we talked about first impressions. Let's talk about what Warren meant. As you will see, what he said is on the screen. Warren says,
when they would sacrifice their children to Baal. Because as long as I get my good crops, I'm willing to throw my child on the pyre.
This is clearly a reference to Baal worship. No Calvinists today throw their kids on the pyre. Then he said,
you know, as long as I am being blessed financially, I'm willing to throw my child on the pyre.
While most Calvinists would like to be financially blessed, this is the same as the last one. It makes no sense for Warren to conclude that Calvinists sacrifice children for money, but it does make sense for Baal worshipers. So this clearly must be in reference to pagan worshipers. Finally, he says,
it's the same mindset where they're like, well, God may have eternally reprobated my child, but as long as I get into heaven, I'm cool with that.
Still being confused about this, I put on my Sherlock Holmes hat and I mustered up the strength to send Warren a message to get to the truth. Is Warren Mcgrew crazy? Let's talk about it. I ask, do you think that Calvinists that believe in infant damnation get upset when their children die? He says yes, as I expected, because Warren would have to be absolutely insane to think Calvinists are cool with their children going to hell. So what did he mean by saying that Calvinists are cool with that as long as they get into heaven? Well, I kept digging and saw he commented further. He said,
you have a pagan, and they love their baby, and in profound grief, they toss it into the fire because ultimately they want their God's approval. And if the crops come, well then ultimately the parents are okay with the loss of their beloved child. Similarly, adherents of infant damnation love their baby and are in profound grief when they see God toss it into the eternal fires of hell because ultimately they want their God's approval. And in the grand scheme of eternity, ultimately the parents are okay with the loss of their beloved child.
This explains it. He says people that take such a view are in grief, but ultimately the parents are okay with the loss of their child. Ultimately, because in the short term they are in grief, but in the grand scheme of things, they are okay with accepting the belief of infant damnation. This is similar to how in the context of Old Testament violence, I would say I understand that there are texts in the Bible that say God commanded the Israelites to kill people. I might not fully understand the situation, but there are many different approaches which don't end with God being immoral. So even though I'm not cool with the idea of people being killed, I am cool with that situation because I know that it doesn't affect God's character or the truthfulness of the Bible. I'm cool with that in the context of the discussion is that many Calvinists are willing to still hold the view of infant damnation. In Warren's eyes, to say, I'm not cool with that would be to either reject the view of infant damnation or reject the view of Calvinism as a whole. So we see what he means by most of this, but there is one more thing. He first said,
well, God may have eternally reprobated my child, but as long as I get into heaven, I'm cool with that.
And that's why they are okay with taking such a view. I see why some would be upset about being told they only take such a view because it means they get to go to heaven or because they only care about what God thinks of them. I was still a little confused how he would get to this conclusion, so I messaged him, and my first hunch was wrong again. He says, I don't believe they affirm infant damnation to receive God's approval, but rather are okay with it as they believe they have God's approval. That to question God's damning their child would be on par with questioning God's electing them unto salvation. In response to James White, Warren says the same things in a previous video. In other words, here.
They would have to say something along the lines of, does it bother you that God treats me in Adam? To which I would say it can bother me no more than he treats me as I am in Christ.
So James's response to the question from the atheist is, I can't feel bad for you, or else I'd have to take issue with God electing to save me.
Long story short, Warren doesn't think Calvinists take this position because of what they get out of it. Rather, he thinks they choose not to question it because then they would have to question their own salvation. So the very fact that they get assurance of their salvation is enough assurance to stop questioning. That's obviously very different than my original interpretation, which assumed he thought Calvinists were okay with immoral things just because of what they get out of it. And while I would not confidently say, hey, that is the reason why Calvinists are okay with this type of view, at the same time, I have very little doubts that there are at least some Calvinists out there that take it. If I were to guess, most people have not even thought about that type of question. So I probably would have phrased it differently if I were Warren in this situation. Of course, it was a 4-hour unscripted video. We shouldn't expect him to have perfect, completely clear language. Nobody speaks like that. Okay, so now we have fully understood Warren's perspective. There was one question that was the most important thing that I had to ask Warren, though. I said, do you think people should subscribe to my channel? To which he said yes. So for real. I'm a biblical studies student who interviews scholars on the Bible and apologetics. If that interests you, hit the sub button. Also, I wanted to quickly mention how people have responded negatively to what Warren and Leighton did once people got upset with him. In response, he made a video explaining his position further, which was certainly helpful, but then he made a more aggressive claim.
I'm sincerely wrong that I did not use harsher terms to condemn it, like noting it's the spirit of Antichrist and that it's contrary to the God of Scripture.
Also, while making jokes.
There once was a live stream with 3 men, Leighton, Jordan, and Warren, to oppose that infants God does hate, and thus began Baalgate.
Warren was also nice enough to add some additional clarity on why he mentioned the view of infant damnation, which according to him is the spirit of the Antichrist. Turns out he was literally quoting a Bible verse, but he specifically told me this.
So I'm not claiming that all adherents of infant damnation are devil worshippers or that they've taken the mark of the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, that they're worshiping the Antichrist. I'm saying that the doctrine, ultimately, if logically followed, results in a denial of the incarnation or a corruption thereof, and in both cases meets Scripture's description for the spirit of Antichrist.
Now, anyone knows me knows that pretty much in all situations I will be making jokes. And of course, to Warren, this whole thing has been silly. I mean, he said something that he sees almost no significance to, and all of a sudden people are calling him a liar, accusing him of doing terrible things, all because they didn't understand what he originally said. That's a ridiculous situation, so I totally get why he would joke about it. I often hear the phrase, you do you can't please everyone, which is certainly true. At the same time, people like Marlin, James White, Chris Date, and other Calvinists said and did what they did because they were hurting. So to make jokes about it, whether Warren saw them hurting or not, was even more hurtful and came off as inconsiderate to a lot of people. Hurt people obviously aren't going to be more willing to understand Warren if they are hurt. And if hurt people can't understand Warren, they certainly aren't going to be convinced of Warren's views. I will certainly not claim that in these situations we should be totally 100% serious. We obviously can't please everyone, and if it wasn't clear, I don't say any of this to call people out. I've done pretty much the exact same things since I've been on YouTube. And nothing I've said today should make you think there isn't any value in the content that each person I've mentioned makes. These are just comments that I think could help people moving forward. Should Warren have made jokes or said what he said? I don't know. It depends on what Warren's views are. But if his goals are to convince Calvinists, that's obviously not going to be helpful there. To add on to the random list of things mentioned in this video, I wanted to encourage everyone that in any situation in life, if something we hear makes us emotional, really try to question those thoughts. Make sure you really understand the other person you are listening to or in dialogue with. Be conscious of your first instinct of attacking back or running away. Finally, let me know in the comments if you want me to make a video on what psychological reasons would make people feel attacked and so upset about this. I can also make a video giving additional reasons why Calvinists who believe in infant damnation have very similar beliefs and actions as those that would sacrifice their children in biblical times. Let me know what I missed. Let me know about your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, check out the video right here.